So we've seen in the first round of this new ceasefire deal that 3 hostages have been released by Hamas in exchange for 90, that's 90, Palestinian prisoners. And I want to talk about this deal because obviously I am deeply, deeply relieved and felt extremely emotional to see the 3 Israeli hostages released and reunited with their family. But there's something very concerning about this deal and the messages that it sends and the morality, or I would even say immorality, of this and what's been agreed. And I need to explain why, because sometimes in life, things that seem like they're right and the obvious thing can have long-term, very negative implications. And it's very easy to do what seems right and support what seems right in the short term, but I think we can often be far too short-termist. But before we talk about that, I want to show you, this is a clip of Hamas. Funny, they're now wearing uniform. They weren't wearing uniform when they're fighting the IDF. They're wearing civilian clothing to hide. Now, they're proudly showing that they've got their hostages. And they, look, standing on Red Cross vans. I mean, where were the Red Cross for these hostages, by the way? The Israeli hostages. Nowhere to be seen. They're standing on top of them, showing no regard for what the Red Cross are doing for the hostages, and they're all screaming as they Allahu Akbar as the hostages were being taken back into Israeli custody. And there's such a clear difference. You know, you wonder if there's a genocide going on here. We're seeing cheering, we're seeing people full of energy, full of hatred, by the way. And they seem to be thinking that they've won in some kind of way, or at least that they're certainly not finished. And that really gets to the heart of this problem. See, what's happened and what's being agreed in this proposal is that they're going to be releasing, I think it was like into the thousands of Palestinian criminals, murderers, people that committed terrorist attacks, people that incited violence and hatred. I mean, if you ever wanted to see the lack of moral equivalence, you've got people who are innocent civilians who are simply going about their lives, and then people who are trying to incite genocide and hatred against the Jewish people being released from prisons. But we need to think about the implications of this deal, of what's being said. And again, I can't keep stressing enough that every single day I pray that God releases all the hostages, that we find them, that the IDF capture them, that they're released one way or another and protected in the meantime from any rape, pain, mutilation, injury, abuse, or death. And yes, that's on the tip of my lips because I say it every single day. But then there's the question of how we do that. And when it comes to prisoner exchanges, there's something very, very dangerous and even immoral about this, that it seems to me Torah, Jewish morality, strongly cautions against. And this is not going to be my opinion in this video. It's going to be the opinion of actually our sages and more specifically the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe of Chabad, who is arguably the most influential rabbi of the last 100 years. And he spoke about this because Israel has done this in the past. Let's not forget, before people say, you know, come on, just do the prisoner swaps and let's worry about the implications later. You know who was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, where Gilad Shalit, who was a captive Israeli soldier held captive by Hamas, you know who was released in a deal to release him? Yahya Sinwar, the architect of October 7th. The fundamental issue shouldn't even be complicated to us. It's the reason why we saw some ministers from the government resign in Israel, because of this deal. The fundamental issue that should not be complicated is we don't negotiate with terrorists. Why is that such a controversial opinion? That's been the policy of the United States, has it not? We don't negotiate with terrorists. Why? Because if you do negotiate, you incentivize more terrorism. You create a terrorist, a kidnapping industry. So people say, well, we want to show that we won't leave anyone behind. Well, yes, but on the other hand, you now hold every single Israeli hostage, every single Jew hostage, by saying we will negotiate with you. You tell them it pays to take hostages. If you really had a no policy, zero tolerance for any kind of negotiation, they'd have no incentive to take hostages. And to think that there's going to be no implications to releasing dozens of terrorists into, it's not, by the way, just Gaza, it's Judea and Samaria, the West Bank as well. And I know there'll be some people that push back and they say, well, maybe Israel's tagged the people who they've let out. And, after the Pedro attack, I wouldn't be surprised by anything Israel might do. But this has happened many times in the past before. And the problem is, if they get caught tagging them or finding a way to catch them again, then their ability to do these things in the future won't work anymore. Because Hamas won't trust Israel, that they'll stick to their word. And this has happened in the past, time and again, that we have done these prisoner swaps. So people say, maybe Israel agreed to this because there's things we don't know that Netanyahu knows. Maybe there are things about that they agreed to do in Iran. They were told they could do an Iran attack if they did this deal. Maybe. I don't know all the details. But it would seem to me from what I'm going to show you now that the lesson is you always show strength. It shouldn't be, well, you release terrorists into the streets and then you can attack Iran. You say, no, we're not going to do that. And we will attack Iran. And you should support us. We should threaten more of our people's lives in order to just win political brownie points. Let me show you the words of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who spoke about this very issue. Have a watch.
Noch geben sich in die Jungen von Terroristen, jeder Riede verweitigt und der hat als Zipur, als in der Gewenke in ander Weg, aber frei ist, Zeiten mit befreit, 70, tracht bei sich, öfter das der Weg, bis wann es mit mit Galle gewinnt. Als wie schon unter die etliche und 70 gewinnt, a Timata halb. Und die, was eine dort nicht gewinnt, bei Beis Asuri, wegen Unionen von Madekach. Und die, was Befehl sich vernommen, mit Unionen von Meise Chavolo, bis Meise Chavolo, was gekostet, nicht Porsches Mamosh. Achmon il-Islam Aratzchen, was Befehl ist, auch halte, welche Leid heuer ist hier. Sa Meise, was mir konnet haben zurück, der etliche und 70 gefühne sich bekopft. Was Rachmon il-Islam heuer ist hier, wir setzen nicht die Siebe, aber sollen sich nicht mit Stadel sein, noch einmal heuer ist hier. Nicht
I find it hard to see how could we not heed the lesson of October 7th, that Sinwar, we thought we were showing compassion. We thought we were being the bigger person by treating him in Israeli hospitals for life-threatening disease and then releasing him in a deal. How can we not learn the lesson? Again, this is not to say I don't want the hostages released. Of course I do, more than anything. Want to protect every single Jewish person's life. The question is how we achieve it, how we get there. Torah morality teaches you get them back and you stop more hostages being taken through showing strength, strength, strength. Bringing Hamas to their knees. Not accepting a ceasefire where it seems like they can continue to exist, to govern. I want to read to you the words of a book which talks about the Rebbe, who spoke about this in more detail. It's a book called Make Peace, a strategic guide for achieving lasting peace in Israel based on the teachings of the Rebbe, where he speaks about this very issue of prisoner exchanges, a reward for terror. I want to read to you the words of this section of the book. The Rebbe explains that when dealing with terrorists, civilian rules of engagement do not apply. Instead, we must adhere to the principle, if one comes to kill you, rise up to kill them first. In the context of active terrorists, this means that they should be neutralized rather than imprisoned. As early as 1968, the Rebbe cautioned Israeli government representatives, "You will pay dearly for imprisoning terrorists, since in the future their various allies will demand concessions to release them and call for prisoner exchanges." The Rebbe's prediction came to pass in 1978 when Palestinian terrorists kidnapped Israeli soldier Avraham Amram. Following a sustained public opinion campaign, the Israeli government agreed to release 76 convicted terrorists, including murderers, in exchange for Amram's safe return. The Rebbe strongly criticized the disproportionate prison exchange, arguing that it would embolden terrorist groups, set a dangerous precedent, and lead to the frequent release of convicted murderers. The Rebbe began his criticism by noting the disproportionate nature of the exchange. He said, quote, "The US and the Soviet Union have recently engaged in a prisoner exchange, but in that case 5 prisoners were exchanged for 2. In contrast, Israel has exchanged 1 individual for more than 70 prisoners. We're seeing the same thing now." The Rebbe then presented the core critique of such exchanges. The Israeli government itself had previously announced that refusing to capitulate to terrorist threats is a fundamental guiding principle, firmly supported by Jewish law and common sense. Furthermore, from a political standpoint, establishing a precedent of releasing terrorists will embolden terrorist organizations, encouraging them to take more hostages. Thus, we have no choice but to demonstrate that this strategy will not advance their objectives. Yet in a shocking reversal, the government abandoned the principle, exchanging over 70 terrorists, among them several known murderers, for a single hostage. The Rebbe's foresight proved to be accurate, as the number of terrorists released in such exchanges escalated exponentially over time. In 1983, Israel freed 4,765 terrorists in exchange for 6 abducted Israeli soldiers. Just 2 years later, in 1985, Israel released 1,150 terrorists to secure the return of 3 kidnapped Israeli soldiers. The trend continued in 2011, when Israel freed 1,027 terrorists in exchange for abducted Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. Among those released as part of the deal was Yahya Sinwar, who had been serving a life sentence for orchestrating the abduction and murder of 2 Israeli soldiers and 4 Palestinians. While he was in prison, Israel treated Sinwar for a near-fatal brain tumour, saving his life. Tragically, following his release, Sinwar went on to mastermind further attacks, including the devastating October 7, 2023 massacre in Israel. Beyond pragmatic considerations, Rabbi Shalom Wolpo articulates that the Rebbe's principled opposition to prisoner exchanges is on the following halachic grounds, which means in Jewish law. Quote, "Despite the unique circumstances surrounding prisoner exchanges where the abductors are seeking to advance ideological goals rather than obtain financial gain, there might be grounds to discuss the halachic basis for prisoner exchanges. The baseline principle teaches one may not redeem hostages for exorbitant sums, as doing so would incentivize further abductions. This principle, which allows for negotiations in hostage situations, was initially established in the context of cases where the abductors were solely seeking financial gain. However, when the negotiations involve exchanging hostages for convicted terrorists, capitulation is strictly forbidden due to the overriding principle of pikuach nefesh, safeguarding life. The free terrorists openly declare their intention to continue perpetrating attacks, rendering their release a clear and present danger to innocent lives." So, what we're actually seeing here is that, contrary to thinking that this is going to help save lives, it could actually create more bloodshed. And that's why, please don't get me wrong, I am beyond delighted that Shalit was released. I'm delighted that we have 3 more hostages that have been released. But the only way that Israel can long-term establish peace and an end to bloodshed is very simply through showing uncompromising strength. And prisoner swaps, where you release terrorists back into the streets, where they can plan for future attacks, is dangerous because of what they could do, and it's also dangerous because of the message that it sends. It sends a message of weakness, and it's something that I think hopefully a lot of people will come to understand. To me, it seems disturbed that we can't learn that lesson after October 7th, given that Sinwar, who was released in a prisoner exchange, was the architect of October 7th. These are extremely hard conversations to be had, and I've no doubt that I will get a lot of pushback for this. And as I say, I'm here not articulating my opinions, I'm articulating the opinions of rabbis and sages and halakhic experts and people that are far, far greater and smarter and wiser than me. And I also, as I say, will reiterate, I don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes, but I could say the same about previous prisoner exchanges as well. And we've seen the fruits of what happens there. So I think we need to become aware of this, and also this notion that, maybe they're just negotiating with the Americans, do this, do that. That should never be the way. A friend should stand with you, whatever it is that you need to do what you need to do to protect yourself and your people. And if they won't, well, then they're not your friend. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.